Today, we welcome Ashlie Thomas, the Mocha Gardener and author of How to Become a Gardener. Her love for wellness and the environment fueled her passion to grow food and bring awareness to issues of food insecurity in vulnerable communities. She believes her garden may serve not only as a spiritually enlightening place to ground and regenerate, but also as an opportunity to deeply connect and give reverence to what she feeds herself, her family, and her friends. Please welcome Ashlie Thomas.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. I'm excited to talk about something I'm deeply passionate about. And I look forward to kind of going on this journey with all of you. I welcome you to ask questions as we're going along. I like conversations, and it's unfortunate that I can't really meet all of you or see you face to face, but I encourage us to connect via the chat box. Let me get started here. All right. So for those of you who do not know, I go by the Mocha Gardener online. And this is a blog that I started in 2019 to really chronicle the journey of, me coming back to the land, of me really diversifying our nutritious food access. And when I say our, I mean starting with my family. So I started to really showcase this evolution of how I was, utilizing gardening to increase my food access. And it just took off. And it's incredible how many people this has resonated with and how many folks felt the exact same way. So I look forward to kind of sharing with you what this actually means. And this is really rooted in the title of my book that I published in 2022 called How to Become a Gardener, Find Empowerment in Creating Your Own Food Security. And I know some folks are probably thinking, whoa, that's unique. How to become a gardener. It's not necessarily a book that's solely going to show you how to garden, but how to be more mindful of the person that you become as you're going through your gardening journey. So before I begin, I want to give you a little bit of information about me. And if you follow me on social media, you may know that I've got a background in the sciences. More specifically, I've got a degrees in biology and chemistry for my bachelor's. And I started to really migrate more into the food space, food policy, food security work. So I went back to grad school for food and nutritional sciences, and I'm continuing that in my research around food security, just in case you got curious. Outside of that, I am a wife to a brilliant man, and he is the builder behind many of the structures that you may or may not see in this presentation. But together, we built our garden in 2019 from the ground up. We are also dog parents, chicken parents, cat parents. We have a lot of animals that we are friends with on our property and that we help to nurture as well. And they nurture us. I'm also a family person. That is a big reason for why I am doing what I am doing and why I am so deeply passionate about health and wellness and how food ties in. So that's a little bit about me. I welcome you guys to kind of chime in and tell me about yourselves as well. So just to give you kind of an idea of how today's session is going to go, we're going to go over an introduction of, what this is all about. Then we're going to talk about a garden defined. And I want to say many of these titles that we're talking about in this session, you'll find them in my book as well. Of course, in my book, I go into deeper details, but I'm going to kind of highlight some of the concepts today in this presentation. Next, we're going to speak about gardens as a resilient intervention, sowing good seeds and what that actually means for the garden, but also for the gardener. empowerment through growing, and how the garden grows you. And then we want to make space for key takeaways and questions and answers. So, as an introduction, these hands that you see are my grandparents, and I'm going to give you a little bit of story behind that, a little bit, or coming up. But I want to speak about where this all began. What is this journey of becoming a gardener? And it started with a why. Uh, More recently, I think we've started hearing individuals explain kind of your why for getting into gardening. And we all have different reasons. Some of us want greater self sufficiency, some of us want a healthier lifestyle. We want to engage in that. We want a proactive way of controlling our food source. And then we just wanted a healthy outlet or a healthy hobby. Um, I wanted all of that, honestly. And I want to kind of highlight a little bit more about what my why is, because I think the last time I mentioned this was earlier on in my journey, and I definitely explain it in greater depth in the book. But it started with these two people on the right side. If you guys can imagine, or if you guys can guess, these two individuals are my grandparents. This is Marguerite and Maxie Williams. We lived in South Carolina before we moved up north to North Carolina. And in South Carolina, we lived in a small town called Effingham. And I think that kind of explains to you how deeply rural this place was. But in that space, I was helping to take care of my grandparents. I was finishing up undergrad. And also, I was kind of, watching them and advocating for them as they were, trying to overcome some of their chronic illnesses. But even more, I started to see kind of this gap in, or better yet, an opportunity uh, through gardening. My grandfather grew up farming. He got away from it when he moved up north. And that's typically what we saw in my grandparents' generation, people migrating from the South up to the North for better job opportunities. But once he retired, his health declined. He moved back down South, but he still kind of maintained this little garden. And when I was there, I watched him, uh, you know, cultivate this green space, and it was incredible because that was really my closest interaction or encounter with watching food be cultivated from seed in the ground. And so that was a light bulb moment for me, in that I made that connection of, wow, you could really produce the foods that you need using the ground. And it was just a powerful experience for me. We were on family land. This land had been in our family since the 1700s. And it was it was in that moment that land stewardship became a kind of a foundation for me in the research that I was doing. So my grandparents were my why. The health of my family is my why and was my why for getting started. I'm interested in hearing what, if any, reason do you have for getting into gardening? And if you're not engaged in gardening right now, what could be a why for you? So I want to kind of incorporate this concept of food security. When I was in Effingham and in this deeply rural city, I started to realize the issues surrounding nutritious food access. When I tell you guys that this place was deeply rural, I mean there was one flashing light. I mean, we moved on up eventually years later and got a Dollar General, but there was a convenience store that was, maybe 10 minutes away. It crossed between like a gas station and this little country store that you could buy some type of breakfast biscuit with like bologna and things like that. But in terms of, greater food options, it was lacking there. And so what that kind of, alerted me to was this concept of food access and food security. Now, I wanted to define this for you that what food security is. We've heard this term being, kind of thrown around in more recent times, but it's a situation when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and health preferences for an active, healthy life. That is a mouthful, right? And I cannot imagine what it was like to be on the committee at the World Food Security Summit, having to figure out what that definition was like, because it has to be all encompassing. True food security is where we have the foods that we need to not just survive, but to thrive. That's what I wanted, not just for my grandparents and for my husband and for my other extended family, but I wanted that for me. I wanted that for my community. And so, what better way to take one small step towards that than going into gardening? So now we get into kind of this concept of a garden defined. And when I think about, a garden, and I'm going to ask you guys, pose this question to you guys. A garden can be so many different things. It's really a space that you're cultivating green life. And when I think of space, I think of, small spaces, large spaces, land, using containers, all of the above. But here and in the book, I kind of dive into this a bit further of, all of these spaces that can, be used as a garden. And these are not the only options here. I'm just highlighting just a few because I could do a whole nother presentation on the many different types of gardens that one can engage in and cultivate. But here we've got raised beds that are typically made out of wood or metal. And there's so many options nowadays for using raised beds. There's also hydroponic gardens, which is really using some type of aqueous solution to grow your plants in. And so you're not necessarily using soil, but more so a water-based solution to, grow your plants. And it does very well. We've got vertical gardens here that you see. I'm actually growing with 3 of these right now. And you can grow pretty prolifically with these vertical spaces. Sometimes we think that you just have to grow horizontally, but no, there's a whole different dimension of space that is often underutilized, and that is vertical gardens. And lastly, we've got in-ground gardens, which, I have experience with all of these. In-ground gardens are what we commonly see not just in smaller gardens or even gardens with large acres, but we often see these in on farms as well. So I want to give, a little bit of pros and cons to all of these growing methods. For raised beds, you've got this protection against small animals. I will say, when we started our garden, we used all raised beds. It was quick fairly quick if you have a handy person that's able to put the beds together or build them. And it also kind of gave us the option of bringing in soil and using, growing in a compact way. We were also able to, we didn't really know how to work our soil here in North Carolina. Our soil is made of clay. And as we were, starting our garden, we had to do a lot of amending to that clay. So in order to get started, we actually brought in raised beds and brought in soil from a local source to actually jumpstart our garden. And we kept those for the entire duration of our garden. But they are expensive to start. It can be. Now, I've seen many resourceful options for grow using and building raised beds. Facebook Marketplace is incredible. I live on there, and it's a great place to recycle materials that people often do not have no place to or just recycle materials affordably. Next is there's another con is that you have to top off often, pretty much after every season. And that can be, an affordability issue or not. It just depends on what you're topping it off with. We started to compost and build our soil, so topping off was not that big of an issue. Yeah, someone mentioned that they bought in soil in bulk. Yes, and having a ton of weeds. Yes, yes, yes. You've got to be mindful of where you get that soil from, and it can get pretty pricey. So I feel you on that. The next, yes, I have done the no-till gardening. I'm going to get into that in the in-ground. The next option I want to talk about is hydroponics. Yes, it can be more water efficient, and you can do away with the weeds that Desiree was talking about, but it's got an expensive cost setup. I have some friends, some farmer friends, and also just some nerdy ag friends that have built their own hydroponic systems, and they built it for a very cost effective, in a very cost effective way. So if you've got that engineering background, I highly recommend exploring that as an option. Nevertheless, it does oftentimes rely on some type of advanced technology or electricity or some type of energy source, which can, potentially be solar operated if you have that capability. Next, like I showed you, is the vertical gardens. We use that vertical gardens in smaller spaces, like on a deck. So if you don't have like 5,000 square feet the way we did for our garden, I highly recommend, considering those, growing vertically, whether that be on shelves or using kind of that staggered, garden tower that I showed you. And not only does that help you to grow a lot of food or a lot of different plants in a compact way, but it also helps with ventilation, which is really an issue here in North Carolina during the warmer months. There are some limitations to that, such as, being limited in what you can grow sometimes. But you can kind of make do with what you have. And if you have some of those deeper growing vegetables or plants, I highly recommend, not just growing vertically, but perhaps in a container as well. Lastly, we've got the in-ground gardening, which is a method that we eventually moved into because, yes, it is very much so cost efficient. If you have the space to, grow in ground, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of work that you have to do ahead of time before you just throw plants and seeds into the ground. You really need to understand the composition of your soil, the chemistry of your soil, and also the condition of your soil. Is it going to be conducive to growing something edible or even growing plants? These are things you have to be mindful of. And it's also pretty laborious. There's a lot of bending down, a lot of, movement that's required with in-ground gardening. But there's so many different types of technologies and tools that can help ergonomically with this that I highly recommend exploring those things. The cons is the soil tilling and amending. I think, Melissa, you mentioned about my thoughts around the no-till gardening. And, when I first got into this, I started to really question, what are the benefits of tilling soil, or better yet, not tilling the soil? And really that gets into soil health. It gets into understanding or fostering a healthy microbial environment for the soil when you don't till frequently. For us, when we got into in-ground gardening, we tilled initially, but we didn't do any type of robust tilling afterwards because as the plants decomposed, not disrupting the chemistry and also some of the microorganisms in the soil uh, help to create a fertile and more viable soil composition in our space. Now, I am not going to shame anyone for any of these methods, and whether you are till or no till. But these are, I like to just share things that I have gathered along the way. And just whatever you do, be informed about it, but be gentle with one another as we are all learning how to work best with nature. And yes, there's a higher likelihood of weeds. And that's a whole nother story because weeds can compete with your plants, but I will say that, it's just one of those due diligence that things that you have to do when being a gardener. So next, you want to really think about kind of the space and the potential of your space of what you have. I've highlighted three factors here, but there are so many other factors that you want to keep in mind of as you are kind of visualizing the space that you want to cultivate a garden in. I mentioned soil because that is the foundation from where your plants are going to grow, unless you're doing hydroponics. But nor oftentimes most folks are using soil, but that soil should be loose and well draining and nutrient rich. As for the light, one thing that we did before getting started on in building our garden, we spent a year visualizing our space. We spent a year just studying, what are all of the resources around us? How does the light move throughout the year? What is the soil like? We tapped into resources such as our agricultural extension agency to get soil tests run. We also confided in, those same extension agents on, what grows best, in our hardiness zone. And for those of you that don't know what hardiness zone is, that's basically the zone that you are, an area that you are in, and it kind of gauges what your lowest freezing or what your lowest temperature would be. And that's how they gauge kind of your hardiness zone. So here in North Carolina, we were 7B, but more recently we moved into 8A. And that just lets us know that we have longer, warmer months typically. And we do have some dips into freezing temperatures, but it's not for very long. So we have a little bit of diversity in different types of vegetables and plants that we can grow here, but we're not the tropics. So I have to emphasize that we do have some limitations. In terms of the light, most of these edible plants are going to require between 6 and 8 hours of sunlight each day. So these are things that you want to kind of keep in mind. Next is watering, and then having a watering schedule. Most of these plants are going to require about 1 inch of water per week during the warmer months. And if you're growing outdoors, this is what this is really pertaining to. If you're growing indoors, this you can pretty much modulate this just a bit. But I wanted to kind of highlight this is around edible plants. That's kind of what I like to focus on, is food, plants that you can eat, plants that are going to produce some type of food. So these are some of those factors. This isn't in the deck, but one other very important factor to keep in mind is food. What are you feeding your plants? Like us, plants have to eat. And so a general fertilizer that, for me, I try to stay away from anything with any type of synthetic chemicals or any type of, I try to keep things as clean as possible. Let's just say that. Again, I am not here to judge anyone. However you get started, I have found that We are all in different spaces on our journey, in different places on our journey. So it's really just a matter of informing yourself of what is the best option for you, but even more, what is the best option for the environment? And this is why I choose to grow the way I choose. So I want to speak a little bit about the role of biodiversity, and why this is important in terms of, you, cultivating a garden. When we're cultivating these spaces, we know that plant diversity not only supports a wide range of wildlife, but it's going to promote those beneficial microbial activities. Remember, I was talking about what's in the soil. And then this can, ultimately, these are small steps that we're taking to really boost climate resilience and just our resilience in this environment. And lastly, there is that, the visual appeal, having multiple, types of organisms, multiple types of habitats that we are taking care of is visually appealing. It also helps us to work together with, different types of micro and macro organisms. I do want to speak a little bit about kind of this beneficial microbial activity, because oftentimes we are keeping in mind the things that we can see, but there are millions of organisms that we cannot see, but that help us and help our ecosystems in ways that we do not fully understand. And that is why, we've got microbiology fields like that I was in previously. But when I'm thinking about, cultivating my gardens and or the gardens that that I'm building, or whenever I'm thinking about my place in the ecosystem, I want to foster a great relationship and safety and health and security for even the smallest of things, whether you are an earthworm or a fungi or some type of bacteria. I want to make sure that I am not doing harm to these things. And so promoting this diversity not only helps us to become resilient gardeners, but it helps us to really establish a robust or foster a robust and resilient environment. I agree with you, Joel. Here in North Carolina, someone just asked about or just mentioned about the mosquitoes. I feel you. In North Carolina, we have so much humidity, and I am very acquainted with the mosquitoes. It appears that they get bigger and bigger every year, but for some reason they're here. It is just up to us to find ways for them to not attack us too bad. Now I want to speak briefly about the role of the gardener. So I talked about the role of these other things, but in the book, I often, speak about what is our role. Um, when I'm thinking about myself as a gardener, I'm thinking about myself as a steward of the environment, whether that be through managing this land, using sustainable practices, but also a steward of people. We as, as gardeners, when we're out in our green oasis, we often think that it's just us and nature, but what makes our society, what makes our environment so rich is the people in it as well. Given people can be tough to deal with, but as a gardener, as a steward, I believe that gardening teaches us how to really, engage and foster relationships with others. So gardens as a resilient interventions is what we're going to speak about now. Um, I believe that, when we think about this big climate environmental challenge that we have, it's, I think it goes without saying that climate change is real, or the fact that, there are some deleterious things going on in our environment that cannot be disputed. However, when I think about these problems, they're so big. They're often bigger than me. I used to get so overwhelmed with the problem in that, I used to think, well, what do I do? I can't get my neighbor or the people down the street to change their behavior. So I started to think about what is one small step that I can take to really foster more in environment to engage in more environmentally conscious activities, but to also be a steward of my environment. uh, to me, gardening offers us this eco-conscious step to not only reduce our carbon footprint. I think about the things that I'm able to produce in our garden. We produce food year round, in a variety of foods. But I'm thinking about how many times we do not go to the grocery store, and what that looks like in terms of traveling, but also imagine that scaled. If more individuals had gardens, what that could do to our individual carbon footprint, and how we can start to move the needle, even if it's ever so slightly, to doing healthy or more improved, environmentally conscious activities, such as growing food for ourselves versus purchasing it, and helping our food supply chain. Next is resource conservation. The garden, I found there are ways that you can use less water. It's going to use less water, most likely, than these large scale commercial agricultural producers. And I'm not here to shame these large scale producers, because honestly, you guys, we need them. They are the source for a lot of our foods, but it's a small step for us to kind of take control in our personal or household food supplies. So we're able to really conserve our personal resources in that aspect. And of course, we are able to provide fresh produce, really reducing on some of those supply chains. I want to emphasize this because, and I want to kind of float this out to you guys, but how many of you all thought about food security during the pandemic? That was a huge scare for a lot of folks. And, it was one of those things where, it kind of threw us into chaos, where many people turned to gardening because we didn't know what was going to happen to our society. We just knew that everything kind of froze for a moment. But gardening, as many saw during the pandemic, it provided not just kind of this healthy outlet, but also a way to access food, period. So I wanted to highlight that element, and that food security is not only pertaining to times of dire distress, but also just our day to day. So let me go to the next one here. And in this element here, I want to kind of talk about, 6 practical steps to create a sustainable garden. What can you do? And this is based upon kind of things that others are doing, and things that I have implemented, all of these things, but opting for native plants. Look to improving your soil naturally, like composting, taking some of that food waste, and instead of just chucking it into the trash, if it can degrade, into organic matter, incorporate that into your soil, especially if you know where that food comes from and it doesn't have any harmful pesticides or synthetic pesticides and fungicides. Next is utilize your rainwater. Now, you see this in parentheses, if this is allowed, because I realize this is not allowed everywhere where you can collect rainwater. But if you are able to, it's a great way to recycle a resource that comes right from the sky. Then, like I said, minimizing your use of harsh synthetic fertilizers. Oops, and this is cut off. Fertilizers and, really pesticides, you all. Like I said, I'm not here to tell you what to do, just provide you the information that you need of other options that could be a bit more mindful of the world around you. And lastly, we've got practicing crop rotation and encouraging some of those beneficial insects. Here you can see this bee on one of my echinacea plants, coneflower plants. Interestingly, when we started to cultivate our garden, we didn't have any pollinators. We really didn't have a lot of animals, period. But once we started to incorporate these native plants and improving our soil, we started to see the earthworms and things like the frogs and praying mantis. We even saw a wonderful bee population that came in. Recommendations for sourcing native flower seeds. Yes, so I'm not sure where you're located, Kayla, but one thing that I, highly recommend is tapping into your agricultural extension agency. Oh, hey, you're in NC. Yes, let's chat. Agricultural agencies, also some of these local plant shops that we have in different counties. You can easily Google these. Many of them sell seeds from local vendors. I am very impressed with how North Carolina emphasizes buying local. So you can typically get those things from either a local store, and you can tell what's local by just flipping over your seed pack. It should tell the location from where they were sourced and when they were sourced. And you could also probably ask some of the people that work there if they have that information. I'm going to get into that seed thing a little bit later. So cultivating resilient plants. As we're kind of thinking about all of the things that's happening in our climate, I want to also kind of throw out there that maybe we need to start considering some of these more climate resistant plants or climate change resistant plants. There was a book, I forgot who the author was. I think she was recently on here, but she wrote a really great book about, or I saw it, I want to get it, about climate change or climate resistant gardens or climate hardy gardens. I'm really curious about that book because honestly, I think that we need to start thinking about how to work with nature and not against it. Really being able to diversify our plant selection. And so here on the right, I've highlighted just a few plant groups that do very well with some of those temperature fluctuations that we see. These are things that I keep in our garden all throughout the year. Beans and peas here in North Carolina, we can grow those pretty much in the spring and in the summer and maybe slightly in the fall. But these are, things not only are some of these staples, but they do pretty well with some of the changes that we see going on with our weather. I want to also kind of mention that just an experience that more recently that I've been thinking about here in North Carolina. We love squash. More specifically, we love yellow squash. However, our squash plants, it is known that they tend to be susceptible to something, a pest called the squash vine borer. And when I think about my own words of working with nature and not against it, I often think about, really diversifying something that I love, and instead of incorporating some of these potentially harmful pesticides to combat these squash vine borers, what are other options that I can incorporate? And that's how I've started to think about, bringing in more of these resilient plants, especially as we start to see not just the weather fluctuating, but also the weather is going to also influence the types of pests and animals that we see as well. So we talked about kind of bringing in these new resilient plants for more resilient garden, but how do we become resilient gardeners? Patience is key. One thing that I've had to, I've been blessed with is gardening has taught me how to truly wait and be comfortable in waiting. stay optimistic. And I will say a lot of times that why is a big motivator for how patient, that degree of patience that I have gained. Being comfortable with adapting. Oh man, let me tell you, here in North Carolina, we get, the interesting weather. We've got a temperate climate, but we also have hurricane weather, and that is sometimes very unpredictable. But one thing that, being a gardener has taught me is that, you've got to learn to go with the flow. Uh, when the like when hurricane season comes here, it has the potential to disrupt so much. One experience that I have is we had these tomatoes, an entire line of tomatoes, about 20 different tomato plants. And we had, I think it was Hurricane Michael that came through. And as some of you know, that was a pretty aggressive hurricane. But it came through, wiped out all of our tomato plants. And when I think about, what that could have done, especially, coming from an industry professionally where everything is high performance, everything is about mitigating risks, um, being able to just respect the ebbs and flows of nature has been wonderful. It's been character building for one, reframing some of those challenges into a positive has also helped as well. I have here this picture of some cucumbers that I harvested, and I looked at, was preparing to bite into this cucumber, and I noticed these holes inside of them. And many of you might know what this is, but for some of you who don't, this was an attack by the pickle worms. And basically, they come after the cucurbits and they will bury themselves, and you kind of know exactly, that they're there by they leave kind of, the membrane of the fruit on the outside as they're burrowing into the fruit. And of course, you're going to see this hole. But that allowed me to look at this opportunity. Instead of getting upset, I was able to research. Gardening helps us to become researchers, and it helps us to continuously seek after knowledge of understanding what is going on, not just with my garden, but what is going on around me. And so I have a picture to the right of cucumbers that ultimately, we were able to harvest. And we do this every year, but it's really just, this is part of that cycle of being patient, adapting, and staying positive as much as you can. And lastly, there is being gentle with yourself and embracing the process that not everything is going to go perfectly. As a matter of fact, it's not going to go perfectly at all. But in that, the process, be mindful that, perfection is not something that we should expect with gardening, and perfection is not really something that we should expect with ourselves. So be kind to yourself, and be kind to your process. I think Atia asked, what do you grow best? What is easiest for beginners to grow indoors? That's a great question. And I have a list of those things in my book. But one thing that I can say I grow best, I mean, it's a few things. I love to grow tomatoes. I think I'm really good at leafy greens as well. Those are easy to grow. And when we're thinking about what's something that you can grow indoors, this is assuming that maybe you have some type of artificial light. I highly recommend herbs. And I also recommend maybe some type of kale. If you start to experience, some stunting, or you're not seeing the growth that you want, you might have to incorporate some type of artificial lighting to really promote growth for some of your plants indoors. But it's amazing what you can grow if you have the right setup. Any recommendations on books about garden insects? You know, I am going to let's stay in touch, because I do have some resources for that. And someone I know, I think someone recently released a book. I think it was last year. I can get that title to you after this. So I want to highlight kind of this resilience in the community. What does that look like? Here you can see, I will say, most of the time when I'm in the garden, I look rough. And as you can see, this is a community garden. I was with my friends, and this is a founder. The one in the brown shirt is Miss Lydia, and the one in the green is my friend and professor from a local university. We work and help out at this community garden that's in an at-risk community neighborhood. But we Miss Lydia thought to bring in this garden to create and foster a haven. And it's amazing how this space has taken off and provided so many opportunities for us to not only grow these culturally mindful, nutritious foods and increase access to that, but we're able to work together all from different backgrounds and different different domains of expertise. It's also served as a space for us to offer holistic education and mentoring. These boys are some of the youth from the community, and it's amazing to see them come out maybe after school or during the summer when they have some time to learn how to grow vegetables, but to just learn about life and science and just life skills through gardening. So it's an incredible experience to kind of see their eyes and their minds open to things that they may have not been exposed to. And of course, the knowledge sharing. One thing that we love to do is tell stories, to understand, everyone's backgrounds and to understand everyone's stories and where we come from. But also, some of this technical knowledge. These spaces tend to foster that type of collaboration. And when I said that this was an at-risk community, unfortunately, this particular community has seen its fair share of gun violence and high drug use. And so Miss Lydia's vision as a gardener and a land steward was to create a space that could unify the community, that could serve as a safe haven for those that lived in the community and those that wanted to support the community as well. And I wanted to show some other examples of ways that we are working towards creating a more resilient community in Morriltown. And these students that you see here are from the local university coming. They come, every spring to help to jumpstart the garden along with some of the residents in the neighborhood. And it's really wonderful because they built this into their curriculum of collaborating with community. And next, this is me using a section of the garden to do nutrition education classes and workshops where we take vegetables from the garden and show people how to grow those foods. So sowing good seeds. And what does this mean? I will say that there's a metaphor for this. In the book, I highlight not just ways for, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move my chat box so that I can see. Oops. All righty. Yes. In the book, I talk about, what it means to kind of select seeds and grow good seeds. What does that even mean? I think, Desiree, you asked about, the types of seeds and sourcing locally. And this is a big thing that I highlight in the book, but also here. Sourcing seeds locally allows us to choose seeds that are, compatible for our local climate conditions. I know that I'm not going to go out and try to get cacao, or, mangoes, because it's not going to be conducive to the climate here in North Carolina, where I am, at least not outdoors. Also, being mindful of, the types of seeds that's suitable to your soil type. Not everything can grow in clay, but again, this goes into kind of amending things. And if you have more sandy soil, what are some of the things that, the types of vegetables or plants that you can grow in that type of soil? So thinking about your soil and how these seeds have been adapted to that. And then lastly, selecting seeds that align with your growing seasons to make sure that they thrive. There are just some things here that I have understood that it's just not going to be conducive for me growing. And that's because I may not have as long of a growing season as maybe Florida or, maybe the tropics or even California. So it's really just kind of being mindful of, doing that extra research to understand the types of seeds that can grow within the seasons that you see in your area. What is your best methods for vegetables with seeds that can possibly be saved or stored for next year? I am so glad you asked that because I was getting ready to talk about seed saving. And
Ashley, can I interrupt for just a moment?
yes, yes.
I just want to remind folks that if you need to leave now, we will send the recording around so you can still see all of the webinar. And Ashley, you keep going. We're fine.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. So with seed saving, you asked, what is the best methods for these? There are several different techniques. I highly recommend it, Rana. I hope I'm saying your name right. If you are near an agricultural extension agency, they have many different resources for that. I also have some of that explained in my book for ways to save your seeds, but they have to be dry. It's best that they're in a cool, dark place, and moisture is kind of the it's going to kind of encourage microbial growth. So making sure that there are techniques that are tried and true for that. But seed saving and sovereignty. When I think about sovereignty, I think about, how do we become less reliant on some of these commercial producers? Seed saving allows us to kind of keep, it decreases our commercial reliance. We also have preserving the history and the traditional knowledge. That's what these seeds kind of offer. And I'm sorry, I think I forgot to erase these things here. But we're able to preserve our history and some of that traditional knowledge, especially of some of our indigenous ancestors. It allows us to pass down foods that sustained our ancestors, which is ultimately preserving history. And that, lastly, we've got encouraging community sharing. I think someone mentioned a seed swap that's going to be occurring. That is a great way to not only share foods that are relevant to your culture and to your community, but it allows you to kind of circulate these foods that grow well in your community. But it's a good way of fostering friendships and collaboration with others. And then sowing good seeds as a gardener. For one, we're able to, how do we do this? What does that mean more holistically? Sowing good seeds or ways that we can sow good seeds is by practicing gratitude, simply being grateful for what we've been given, the land that we are on, the land that we have been privileged to rest our heads on and cultivate, extending compassion and empathy towards not just other organisms, but also humans and others that, whether they, align in our values or not. Focusing on strengthening our relationships. Here you see my friend Davina. And one thing that I am, really big on promoting is building and cultivating healthy friendships. And so sometimes I will bring my friends into these spaces simply to bond, to engage socially and to connect. And it's amazing what that will do for not just your relationships, but also kind of your well-being. Lastly, uplifting your community, whether that be through your community gardens or just, one thing we like to practice is sharing our harvests with our neighbors. These are small things that we can do to sow good seeds as stewards of our communities and our environment. And lastly, engaging with the present. Being present, it's so easy to focus on tomorrow or perhaps the past, but gardening allows us to focus on that moment. And I'm thankful for that because we don't go too far ahead and we definitely don't turn back and focus on what was. So the last section is empowerment through growing. And this is really the power of growing your own food. We know that growing food provides us with greater food autonomy. What does that mean? That means that it gives us this ability to choose the foods that we know or that we understand to be best for us. That is typically, rooted and connected a lot of times to our heritage. It's rooted and connected to, how we feel, where we come from, our backgrounds. And so, being able to have that choice is not only empowering, but it helps us to be resilient gardeners. It also improves our mental health. I don't know about you guys, but when I am out in the garden, uh, just being out under the sun, grounded in the soil, it has a way of just helping me to decompress, and it puts things into perspective. So, being empowered to grow there, not only fosters the physical health, but also that mental health aspect. And then it opens our perspectives to greater food diversity. And I want to highlight this a little bit because as you can see in this picture, I've got so many different types of squash growing on in here. Purple, green beans. We don't see these things in grocery stores, but the garden has opened my opportunity and a lot of us to things that we typically don't see very regularly. Okra is very important to me. It's rooted in my culture from my family in South Carolina, but also my family in New Orleans. And so being able to grow a wide variety of okra is significant. It's powerful. It does something to you to grow something that you can connect to. I want to speak about this loofah here as well. We often think about loofah as kind of this sponge that you can produce, or that it's grown solely to use as some type of cosmetic or tool to wash things. But growing it showed me that we can eat it. And this is not just, this isn't, it's a revelation to me, but it's not new. Many cultures rely on this as a staple. And for those of you who are curious, you can cook this just like zucchini, not when it's hard like this or big like this, but when it's small and squash-like, it is tender and really quite delicious. Exploring different types of eggplants and cooking with that and exposing my family to it. That is what the garden has allowed me to kind of explore the different types of foods within genres that we may see in the grocery stores. But it's incredible to how many different eggplants you can grow and the many different ways that you can, prepare them to eat. And then tomatoes. Oh, I don't know if you guys like this or like growing tomatoes. If you do, I would love to hear like maybe what your favorite variety is. I interestingly used to hate tomatoes, but it wasn't until I started gardening and being able to taste tomatoes that were ripened right on the vine and really just kind of the diversity of the different cultivars of tomatoes. I really started to develop an appreciation for the many flavors that existed. And of course, here's some elderberries that you see, really exploring different ways to incorporate different types of fruits and vegetables and herbs into our diet. And lastly, we've got yes, beefsteak tomatoes. I definitely agree with you. I'm growing those this year. Food preservation is another way to empower yourself as a gardener, and also as someone that is seeking to really increase your food access. Here, these are different methods to which we take some of these things that we grow in the garden and try to extend the shelf life, or maybe preparing it in different ways. But canning is a big thing. I love that experience of learning how to can some of our harvests, which allowed us to kind of enjoy them all throughout the year. And with canning and even dehydrating, and perhaps there are other methods, freeze drying. Not only does it offer us food, but it's still going to preserve that nutritional value of the produce when it's at its peak. And ultimately being able to preserve it kind of cut food costs for us, because we were able to kind of utilize our own homegrown ingredients from day to day. And then, of course, you see right here to the right, making medicines and other types of tinctures that helped, especially during when we got COVID, unfortunately, last year. But we were able to kind of source things right from our garden, and that's really what the garden can kind of offer us. So lastly, the garden grows you. Becoming a garden, how does the garden ultimately grow us? And this journey, I have found, and I'm sure that you can agree, that I've gained a bit more humility towards others. I say macro and micro, and that you see over here to the right, this picture of the frog. Quick story. I grew up with a phobia of frogs. I remember saying that I wanted them to all disappear because I just thought they were absolutely terrifying. But it wasn't until I learned that they were indicator species and how important they were to the balance of our ecosystems, our local ecosystems, that I started to really appreciate and understand the value of things outside of me. And it didn't take me recognizing this frog for me to understand the value of others, but that's just an example of really just opening our minds and realizing that I am no better than the frog. I am no better than the earthworm. I am no superior than my neighbor. We need each other to thrive, and I am thankful for those lessons, and I'm sure if you have experienced that as well, it's definitely one that you don't take for granted. It teaches us perseverance. I don't know about you guys, but man, gardening has a way of trying the essence of you. But because we have a defined why that keeps me pushing forward. My grandfather has a saying called you got to keep on keeping on. And I often think about that when the going gets tough, not just in cultivating gardens, but also when I'm doing community work as well. Stay pressing towards the mark, and staying consistent and not giving up, because there are going to be challenges. Remember, I mentioned that squash vine borer. This is an example here at the top of what it's like to have something decimate all of your crop, like all of your squash plants that you put so much effort into. But perseverance tells you to prepare another crop. Perseverance tells you to not give up, but maybe troubleshoot. It inspires creativity. I've been able to kind of exercise a part of my mind, and I'm sure you can agree, that allows me to be creative, whether it be designing the garden or creating bouquets or tapping into creating recipes for delicious jams. These are all things that the garden has kind of, helped me to become, and help has kind of opened my eyes to. I've also found myself being more kinder to myself. That sounds like it's a given, but you know, when we are being, nurturing plants, we do so with tender love and care. But how can we cultivate, or how can we nurture and love something when we don't love ourselves. What kind of sense does that make if we are able to extend genuine kindness towards something or someone else and not necessarily towards myself? So being mindful, practicing gratitude has helped me, and I'm sure others, how to really point that kindness back towards myself. It's also giving me greater awareness of the world around me. Just being mindful of, the different things that's happening in the weather. I'm able to monitor those things with a lot more attention and interest, even. These are some of the virtues that I wanted to highlight, and that I definitely go a bit more in depth in the book. But becoming a gardener is an evolution in itself. Just as we plant seeds in the ground to grow plants, there are seeds that we can plant within ourselves to help us to become uh, thriving beings, just like the plants that we're hoping to cultivate. So some key takeaways here is, finding your why, visualizing what you want out of your garden, and, back to that finding your why. What is it that you're looking for out of your gardening journey? Why are you doing this? Because that why is going to pull you forward during the challenges and helping you to overcome the tribulations that will come along. Visualizing what you want out of your garden and in your journey, like imagine it. In the book, I say things like, you can't be what you can't see, or it's oftentimes difficult to be what you can't see. But once you have a visual, once you do some proper planning and writing that down, it helps you to know, what is it that you're hoping to gain? And that makes this a more fulfilling journey. Equip yourself with knowledge, best growing practices. We kind of talked about it a bit in the chat through some of the questions that you guys asked, but tap into those resources and know that gardens can encourage resilience, not just in the environment, but also in your communities. And ways to further foster that is by sowing good seeds, and with the expectation of knowing that the garden will also grow you. So I welcome you guys to stay connected with me. I welcome you to reach out to me via my website or on Instagram and Facebook. And if you want to hear more about some of these concepts there, I dive into these things in greater detail in my book, How to Become a Gardener, which is available now at all major book retailers. So I welcome you guys to chat with me. Send me an email, send me a DM. I love conversing with others and connecting with others because I feel like that is my responsibility as a gardener. And it's just something that I truly love to do. So thank you so much for your time. And I welcome any other questions that you all might have. Correct the slide, equip yourself doesn't make much sense. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was definitely a typo. I appreciate that. Thank you, Don. Thank you so much. I welcome any other questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Ashlie. We did have a couple questions that you weren't able to answer during the course of your talk.
Yes.
Desiree would love to start a community garden, but would first like to learn how to garden. Any advice?
Yes. Well, this is a shameless plug, but I welcome you to buy my book because I buy my book because I actually dive into the community aspect quite a bit. I am heavily involved in a lot of community work, specifically around growing food and growing community gardens. If you are interested in kind of, either founding a community garden, I highly recommend getting connected with a community garden already. The reason being is not only is there mentorship there, but it helps you to understand how to grow things in your area and how to grow them effectively. Start tapping into some of those resources that I mentioned, the agricultural agencies. Google, connect with other gardeners that are local to you. You can do so via social media, but also a lot of times there are gardening groups in different localities. I definitely recommend that in-person connection. In terms of kind of the other aspect of, starting a community garden, another thing I highly recommend, and this is something that I learned recently, is making sure that you understand the community that you are hoping to grow, start the garden in. If this is not a community that you live or that you have history with, take some time to get to know the neighbors. Take some time to get to know the history of that community, because there's something called a savior complex where oftentimes, and I had to learn this the hard way, years ago, just going into spaces, not being mindful of, you know, you know who the people were, what is the culture like doing that research through relationship building is definitely going to help you to not only be able to get the support that you need to build that garden, but it's also going to help you to connect with others and learn what are the needs of the community, and how can you start to integrate some of those things in that space. So tap into the resources to learn how to actually get started with growing. And if you can, connect with people that are already gardening so that you can get some of that, on the job training. And also you can kind of learn as you're going in real time.
Along those same lines, would you have any additional tips for folks who live in densely populated cities and are looking for a space specifically outdoors to garden in?
Yes. So in densely populated cities, there are, kind of these urban oases that we're seeing popping up. And it's incredible what people are doing in underutilized spaces like parking lots or, rooftops, even. If you have that ability to, grow on a rooftop, or grow, if it's not something that you want to do more on the community level, but maybe on the individual level, take advantage of your balconies, take advantage of your patios if you have that. But yes, those are definitely some options that I highly recommend. And if you reach out to me, I can definitely brainstorm some ideas with you. And if I kind of find out where you're located, maybe we can even get you connected with growers that are actually, cultivating these edible food spaces in these densely populated cities. A great example I just want to kind of throw out is what they're doing in Detroit, Michigan, turning some of these underutilized, like empty lots into gardens, community gardens, individual gardens. And it's really quite incredible how you're able to be resourceful in that way. And a lot of times, it can come with backing from local funding. And by local funding, I mean from your town councils or maybe your local governance. If they find that this is a strategy that will help to beautify your city and help to foster greater wellness of your community.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.
I I'm from Detroit, and today is a special day because one of our wonderful groups that does a lot of food justice and food sovereignty work has officially opened its co-op
Yes.
right in the city.
Is this by Monica White? Is that group led by Monica White by chance?
I'm not sure if Monica's
Okay.
involved. I'm
Okay.
familiar with a few other folks.
Yes, there's so much happening in Detroit.
Mhm.
Little secret, Emma, I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, what? No way.
Yes, I was born in Wayne County, Michigan, right there in the heart of Detroit. So it always has a special place in my heart. And it's really cool to see kind of this, this movement towards, regenerative agriculture in urban spaces. So,
Yeah,
uh,
definitely. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Ashley, for giving such a wonderful presentation and being so engaging. And thank you to everyone for being a part of Green America's Climate Victory Gardens community.
thank you.
Together, we can make a real difference in creating positive change for our planet and its people. You can keep the momentum going and stay connected by subscribing to our newsletter to remain informed about our latest campaigns, events, and sustainability tips, I put a whole list of links in the chat. One of those in there can help you do that. Your support fuels our work toward a greener, fairer future. Consider donating today to help us continue our vital programs and initiatives, including these free gardening webinars. Every contribution counts. And remember that your actions matter. Your actions in your garden, no matter how big or small, matter. And together we can build a more sustainable and just world. Thank you for your commitment to creating positive change, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you, everyone. Take care.